Serethi Voss pressed her palm flat against the cargo hold's riveted floor and counted the vibrations. One for the engine cycling through its fourth compression failure of the hour. One for the debris field scraping the shuttle's ventral hull like fingernails dragged across a coffin lid. And one, deeper, slower, pulsing in a rhythm that had nothing to do with machinery, rising from the Progenitor wreckage tumbling in the dark outside. The binding scars at the base of her skull throbbed in time with that third vibration. She closed her eyes and let the hum fill her teeth. Lord Thyros crouched at the cockpit's secondary console, his prosthetic hand splayed across the scanner interface, matte black fingers twitching as data scrolled. He had been tracking the Ashsinger relay beacons along the Death World corridor, automated signal buoys that the Singers used to mark safe routes between dying colonies. Standard navigational charity, except the signal pattern threading through the third beacon was not charity. It was silent choir cipher, his father's cipher. Kael said, "They know our heading." He did not look up. His organic hand was steady. The prosthetic was not. The shuttle banked toward Phelan. Through the viewport, the planet resolved from a sulfur-brown smear into geography. Bone-white salt flats cracked into hexagonal plates. A cluster of habitat domes huddled around a geothermal vent column, trailing steam into a yellow sky. And rolling across the horizon, a chemical storm 3 kilometers high, a wall of rust-orange particulate lit from within by branching veins of static discharge. They had perhaps 90 minutes before it swallowed the domes. Serethi said, "Maren walked this corridor." Not a question. She could feel it the way she felt the hum, a pull in the architecture of her nerves, something older than memory. Kael checked his sidearm. He said, "Maren walked a lot of places. Right now, I need to know if the people down there are going to shoot at us or sing at us." Halia Vaughan's transmission had reached them 6 hours earlier, relayed through 3 dead drops and a resistance courier on Jessad's burning farmland. The message was brief. Trajectory sent to corridor contacts. Network expecting you. Do not stop longer than the storm allows. Halia's voice had carried the flatness of someone who has spent years compressing urgency into protocol. Kael recognized the craft. He had been trained in it. The central dome's airlock groaned open on corroded hydraulics. Inside, the air was thick with mineral paste vapor, a sweet alkaline haze that coated the throat and made every breath taste of chalk and copper. Amber emergency light pooled in the folds of tapestries that lined the curved walls, each one stitched dense with pictographic shorthand. The names of dead civilizations. Serethi's boots crunched on grated flooring, and beneath the grates, geothermal vents hummed. Old Senna sat at the center of the Ashsinger ring. She did not rise. Her milky eyes tracked nothing visible, but her head turned the moment Serethi crossed the threshold, a precision that had nothing to do with sight. The data chip necklaces layered across her robes clicked softly as she shifted. She said, "You sound like your mother's ship." Her voice was gravel and mineral paste, and something beneath both, a resonance that vibrated in the dome's metal bones. Serethi said, "I never knew my mother." Old Senna replied, "I did not say you did." The Ashsingers had been expecting them, not hours, not days, a century. Old Senna's hands trembled in her lap, then stopped. She began to speak, and the dome went quiet. The message chain, she explained, was not initiated by any house, not by Maren, not by any human being. A progenitor system in the sunken archive had transmitted a sequence of phonetic fragments into the Ashsinger network 107 years ago, encoded in welcome songs and lullabies and death chants. Each singer on the corridor carried one fragment. None understood what they held. The mineral paste in their throats produced the exact resonant frequency the fragments required to remain intact across generations of oral transmission. The relay singer, a gaunt woman with 3 necklaces of corroded data chips, leaned forward and hummed a phrase. Then the singer beside her hummed another, then the next. Fragments layering, not quite melody, not quite language, settled into the dome's still air. Old Senna's instructions had referenced a second voice, a phrase that troubled the singers for decades. Was there another Solibri air? Or did the voice refer to something the progenitors had encoded into the binding itself? No one knew. The phrase remained, unresolved, waiting. Old Senna raised one hand. The ring fell silent. She opened her mouth, and the final phrase came out in a language Serethi had never studied. But Serethi's lips were already moving. The words rose from somewhere below thought, from the binding scars, from the luminous veins spreading down her neck, from whatever the sunken archive had written into her nervous system during the partial interface. Her voice joined Senna's. 2 voices braided into one phrase, and the binding scars at Serethi's neck flared white hot, and she saw it. A coordinate burning behind her eyes like a star drawn in wire. The seed. Its location inside the Velarys Nebula, precise to the kilometre, seared into her like a brand. Serethi's knees hit the grated floor. Tears ran down her face. Not grief, not pain, but recognition. Maren's voice was in this song, passed from throat to throat across a century of dying worlds, carried by people who never understood what they held. And it had arrived here, now, in this crumbling dome, because the progenitors had planned for her. Before her birth, before Maren found the infant in the wreckage, before the transport crashed, before the house that bore her bloodline was burned from history. Kael was not watching the singing. He was at the dome's maintenance panel, prying open a corroded junction box. Inside, nested among the legitimate relay wiring, he found it. A silent choir dead drop. Standard House Thyros surveillance hardware, disguised as a signal repeater, time-stamped 41 years ago. His father had been monitoring this network since before Kael was born. Every phrase the Ash Singers carried, every fragment of the Progenitor relay, Lord Thyros had heard it all. He had not understood it, but he had heard it. Kael said, "He's been listening for 40 years. His voice was level. His prosthetic hand had crushed the dead drop housing without him noticing. Old Senna, from across the dome, replied, "We know." The Ash Singers had known. They had carried the fragments anyway, under surveillance, through death worlds, generation after generation, because the message mattered more than the Watchers. Maren had known. She had raised Serethi on dust, knowing that Lord Thyros' network was a shadow behind every song. Old Senna reached beneath her layered robes and produced a single corroded data chip. Maren's 12th chip. Every Ash Singer's necklace held one chip for each civilization memorized. Maren had carried 11. The 12th was blank. Senna said, "She kept it for the one that comes after, whatever you build." She placed it in Serethi's hand. The chip was warm. Outside, the chemical storm hit the dome. The polycarbonate shell screamed. Salt crystals pinged off the patched metal in a continuous rattle, and sulfur yellow light flooded through the crazed panels, turning the interior the color of old bruises. The vent column's steam bent horizontal. The tapestries swayed. Through it all, the Ash Singers did not move. They had survived worse. Serethi stood in the dome's airlock, the seed's coordinates still burning behind her closed eyes. Her binding scars pulsed in a slow rhythm, not the frantic flare of activation, but something steadier, like a heartbeat finding its rest. Maren's voice was in her now, not memory, not echo, architecture. The progenitors had not just built weapons and thrones and terraforming engines. They had built her arrival into the structure of the galaxy, encoded it into songs carried by the throats of people who would never know what they were singing, on worlds no one fought to save, across a century that ground civilizations to data chips and dust. She could not pretend this was accidental. She could not pretend she had a choice. The Velarys Nebula waited, and the seed waited inside it. And somewhere in the dark between here and there, Lord Thyros' fleet was already moving. Kael stood behind her, saying nothing. There was nothing to say. She opened her eyes. The storm howled. She stepped forward.